late night cemetery, fence hopper, like, convenience store shoplifter. I just don't like trying to get away with stuff. It's not my thing. So there's only one time in my life that I did something just to see if I could pull it off. And that was when I moved to Paris just to find out if my French was good enough to use it in real life instead of in a classroom. And I've entirely forgotten what I was talking about. This has never happened to me before. I'm fairly terrified. I'm just going to keep talking until I remember what the story is about. Usually I go first for this very reason, so that other people don't tell really good stories and you get all involved in their Korean adventures when you've never been there. So I went there. I went to France, and I am so sorry. I just need a moment. I've lost my thread completely. I'm just going to stand here. You talk amongst yourself for a second. I'm a little embarrassed. I don't know. I'm just going to launch ahead. We're going to skip several paragraphs. How about that? When you move to a foreign country, everything you do is a kind of theater, because you don't know how to do anything. You don't know how to buy aspirin or interact with people in the opposite gender, and you are just winging it all the time. And if you're like me, and it's really important to you to blend in, that's your dearest wish, this feels like the stakes are really high all the time. But this was the kind of challenge that I had set for myself. So I was ready. And after I had arrived and I had sort of gotten over my jet lag, I launched into the biggest test that I had set for myself, which was finding an apartment. And this was kind of before the ubiquity of the internet. So finding an apartment involved actual real bulletin boards and paper maps and a lot of walking around and terrifying phone calls in phone booths, things like this. So it seemed to me that navigating this process was kind of the badge of fluency. If you could get to the point where you could sign a lease in a foreign language, you'd kind of arrived. So I fell in love with a little pretty apartment it was quite close to the Louvre, but it was a little bit too much money. I had very, very little money, so any kind of deviation from the budget was significant. So I made an appointment to see a much more modest apartment in the Fifth. And what that had going for it was primarily its location and the hard sell of the landlady, whose name was Madame Offner. And Madame Offner was a woman in her 50s, I would guess, and she had purchased this apartment originally for her son's use when he was in the university, and then she subsequently rented it out to kind of student-y types. And she had a kind of exotic preference for foreigners. So she gave, well, I'm tempted to say she gave me a tour of the apartment, but this would be overstating the situation. The whole thing was right there when you opened the door. It's actually probably better if you just erase from your mind whatever images come when you hear the word apartment. It was a room. It was a very small room. It had a narrow bed, narrower than a twin, and a table and some chairs and a little, built-in kitchenette. But it did have two really extraordinary amenities. Hot water, which Madame Offner was very proud of this. She mentioned it many times. And in a little corner, there was a little extra kind of closet-sized room that had a toilet in it. And this was, to her, very important. It meant that I would not have to use the kind of dungeon-y shared toilet on the landing that was meant for everyone who lived on the 5th floor. And she suggested that if I had company, I should certainly direct them to the dungeon-y toilet and reserve the private toilet for my personal use. And then it didn't have a bath or a shower, but she told me there was a public shower just down the street. So she dismissed this as a pretty insignificant concern. And she took me on a tour of the neighborhood, and she took this occasion to speak to me about the rival apartment in the first arrondissement and the kind of derisive tone that people who live in the Mission use to describe the marina. various things, and she was very bossy, but she was also quite maternal, and I had so few convictions about anything that I kind of appreciated the fact that she had just sort of an unwavering certainty about everything she said, and I found it sort of reassuring. And she was also, at this point, the only person I knew in Paris. So she won me over, and I signed the lease in French, thank you very much, and I moved into my tiny 5th floor walk-up, and after which I had to do other vocabulary exceeding things, like sign up with the electric company, and I had to get rental insurance, it was in the lease, and I had to get a telephone, but I could not get a bank account. And this was before the ease of just using your ATM internationally. That just sort of wasn't a thing. So I had all of my money in traveler's checks, which I kept in a little drawer by my bed. And when I had to pay the rent, I would call Madame Offner, and we'd make a little appointment, and I would go to Thomas Cook, and I would change my traveler's checks, and then I would bring her the cash. But it wasn't just kind of like drop off the money, it was a kind of come up and have tea. And these things would go on for hours. And this is when it occurred to me why Madame Offner preferred foreigners, because she would have this kind of captive audience once a month. And it was as if she had saved all the talking that maybe needed to be done for this one occasion. She lived alone, I don't know, maybe she didn't have any friends, I don't know. So she would talk and talk and talk and talk. And she would occasionally pause to compliment me on my excellent French, which of course was hilarious because I said maybe 4 words an hour. And in reality, I understood about 65% of what she said. And there was this one time where she told me a really long story about some kind of medical procedure that she had recently undergone. And I was being very miscellaneously solicitous, and she got up to further illustrate this, and she returned with a little canister, which she rattled in front of me. And it was clear to me that whatever was in the canister had previously been in Madame Offner. But whether that was gallstones or bits of her spine, I don't know. We will never know. We will never know. And when I was not being, held captive by my landlady, I was out in the world and I was pretending to be a sort of femme fatale, and I was pretending to be an English teacher. And I was super aware of faking it in both of these situations, but I was arguably slightly worse at being an English teacher. So when I got to the 5-month period, I really had run out of money, and so I needed to either get many, many more English students, or I needed to go home. And I took some time. I was quite upset about the idea of leaving. But I really felt like a charlatan as an English teacher, and I didn't like it at all, so I decided it was time to go. So I arranged with my friends Rachel and Antonia that I was going to stay with them for the month of December, rent-free, which would enable me to go home after the new year, which felt like a, sort of a tidier end to the story. And P.S., the idea that you would just stay on someone's floor for a month is a thing that you don't do after you're 20. But they let me do it, and all that remained to do with them was to get my deposit back from Madame Offner, so I had money to actually just live on for that last month. And I mean, my fondness for her had significantly waned since July, and she was also really annoyed with me that I was leaving earlier than I said that I might. But nevertheless, when she told me she would not give me back my deposit until I had paid my phone bill, I was surprised. Partially because your phone bill has nothing whatsoever to do with your landlady, and partially because I had tried and been told by France Telecom no. So when I decided I was leaving, I made the rounds and I canceled my renter's insurance and I paid my electric bill, and I went to France Telecom and they told me that I was not able to pay my bill. And the French phone bill was on a 2-month billing cycle, and I was leaving on a non-billing month. And they told me that generating a mid-cycle bill was impossible. Now, I had been in France long enough at this point that I knew that oftentimes people might say something was impossible when what it means is, this is slightly inconvenient for me right now. And so I quite eagerly persisted, and I said, no, I really do need to pay it because I'm leaving the country and I will not be here to receive the final bill, which to me, scandalous behavior. And she said, this is a big room, I understand that. So it's possible that not all of you can get the full nuance of the French shrug. The French shrug is not really an I don't know, and it's not really a, what are you gonna do? It's more like an existential commentary on the complete and utter meaninglessness of whatever point you may have raised. It is difficult to argue with the French shrug. So I left, and I explained all of this to Madame Offner, who insisted that if I did not pay this bill, no one would ever be allowed to have a telephone in that apartment again. And I honestly don't know. I don't know whether she truly believed this to be the case, or whether she was punishing me for leaving, or whether she just really wanted to steal my money. But I can tell you that that is an absurd fabrication. So, again, Madame Offner was not a person either to be swayed by logic or fact. So I left there too. And my next step was to go to the sort of business office of France Telecom, where I met with another man, and I begged to pay my phone bill, and he told me I could not. And I said, but I'm leaving the country, and he reiterated the France Telecom stance of, well, then I guess we won't be getting your money, which I think is kind of a weird business model. But I guess it's working out for them. So then I told him, but I really, really need to pay this bill because my landlady is holding my deposit hostage until I do. And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, but it has nothing to do with her. And I said, I know. And so he got a piece of France Telecom letterhead, and he hand wrote a letter, the first sentence of which is, Madame, this has nothing to do with you. So that was a solid start. So I took this letter and I went to fetch my friend Antonia. Of all of my expatriate friends, Antonia is the most legit. She's there legally, she knows all the bureaucracies, and her French is way, way better than everyone else's. But the secret weapon of Antonia is that she has herself, she's possessed of certain Offnerian characteristics. Namely, she is unwavering in her certainty of her own correctness all the time. And this makes her a very exasperating and exhausting friend, but it makes her ideal for fighting with your landlady. So we go armed with the France Telecom letter, which we present to Madame Offner, and she immediately rejects it as completely irrelevant and says, anyone could have written this, which I think is a bit of a dubious claim. But again, total certainty, her major characteristic. So I unleash Antonia upon her, and the two of them have a long and heated argument. And the end of this argument is that we agree that I will forward this final bill to Rachel and Antonia, with whom I will leave some sum of money, such that when the bill comes, they can pay my phone bill. And Madame Offner demands that we write this down and we both sign it. And then she asks for a whole bunch of other random documents that she wants photocopies of, none of which she is legally allowed to ask me for. But I really need this money, and I don't know what else to do. So I spend quite a bit of time, copying the letter that Antonia writes for me, and gathering up these many documents. And I go back to deliver this sheaf of quasi-legal papers that she has demanded of me, and she takes this opportunity to tell me many more upsetting things. And by this point, I flatly detest Madame Offner, but as I'm leaving her apartment for the last time, I realize that without this battle, I would not have so fully legitimized my entire experiment. So, essentially, I have come up against the opposite and immovable forces of France Telecom and Madame Offner, and I have not been bested. I came to see if I could pull it off, and I did. And I have a fistful of francs to show for it. Thanks very much. Sorry for